This week's Torah portion is the final Torah portion of the book of Genesis, the book of Bereshis. The name of the Torah portion is Vayechi. And the literal translation of the word is, and he lived, Vayechi Yaakov. And Yaakov lived, Jacob. This week's Torah portion, we go through Yaakov's final moments where he blesses his children. And first, we'll go through a quick overview of the Torah portion, following which we will delve into the topic of tonight. Yaakov lives the final 17 years of his life in Egypt, in Mitzrayim. Before his passing, he asks Yosef to take an oath that he will bury him in the Holy Land. He blesses Yosef's two sons, Menashe and Ephraim, elevating them to the status of his own sons as progenitors of tribes within the nation of Israel. The patriarch desires to reveal the end of days to his children, but is prevented from doing so. Yaakov blesses his sons, assigning to each his role as a tribe. Yehuda will produce leaders, legislators, and kings. Priests will come from Levi, scholars from Yisachar, seafarers from Zvulun, school teachers from Shimon, soldiers from Gad, judges from Dan, olive groves from Asher, and so on. Reuven is rebuked for confusing his father's marriage bed. Shimon and Levi for the massacre of Shechem and the plot against Yosef. Naphtali is granted the swiftness of a deer, Binyamin the ferociousness of a wolf, and Yosef is blessed with beauty and fertility. A large funeral procession consisting of Yaakov's descendants, Pare's ministers, and leading citizens of Egypt and the Egyptian cavalry accompanies Yaakov on his final journey to the Holy Land, where he is buried in the Machpelah cave in Hebron. And actually you can go visit it till today. Yosef too dies in Egypt at the age of 110. He too instructs that his bones be taken out of Egypt and buried in the Holy Land. But this would come to pass only with the Israelites' exodus from Egypt many years later. Before his passing, Yosef conveys to the children of Israel the testament from which they will draw their hope and faith in the difficult years to come. God will surely remember you and bring you up out of this land to the land which he swore to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And Yosef is buried in Egypt until the time when his remains will be brought to the land of Israel. The topic we'll be discussing tonight is leadership. What is a defining element within leadership? What are we looking for? What is a character trait of a leader? And where do we see that in this week's Torah portion, where it'll shed light on what a leader, a king, really is? And so we begin from the blessing which Yaakov gives to Reuven on his deathbed. Just before he's about to pass away, he gives Reuven a blessing, but it's kind of a blessing in disguise. It's really a rebuke. And we see that amongst a few of the Shvatim, a few of the tribes, where Yaakov does not bless them openly, he actually rebukes them. But at the end, he includes all tribes in all the blessings that he gave all the other tribes. And so what does he tell Reuven? Reuven is the oldest son. He is the firstborn. And he tells him as follows: Reuven, you are my firstborn, my strength, and the first of my might. You should have been superior in rank and superior in power. But, he continues, you have the restlessness of water. Therefore, you shall not have superiority, for you ascended upon your father's couch. Then you profaned him who ascended upon my bed. So what we see here is initially Reuven was supposed to be superior in rank and superior in power to all his brothers, to all the tribes, and seemingly over all the Jewish people for generations to come, infinitely. But that was taken away from him because he has the restlessness of water, and therefore he does not have the superior qualities. They were removed from him and given to someone else. Why? Where do we see that he has the restlessness of water? When he ascended upon his father's couch. What does that mean? So Rashi explains, our favorite commentary, you have the restlessness of water, the restlessness and haste with which you hasten to display your anger, similar to water that hastens on its course. Therefore, you shall not have superiority. You shall no longer receive all these superior positions that were fit for you. Now, what was the restlessness that you exhibited? For you ascended upon your father's couch, then you profaned. Then you profaned that name that ascended my couch. This is the Shekhinah, which was accustomed to going up on my bed. What's the haste with which Reuven acted, which caused him to lose the position of superiority, the position of royalty, where he is no longer considered the leader amongst his brothers? So let's go back a little bit in time. Yaakov marries, and he marries Leah. And Leah gives birth to 4 children. Reuven, who's the oldest, he's the firstborn. Shimon, Levi, Yehuda. And then seemingly she stops giving birth. She can't have any more children. Now, I don't remember exactly the order offhand at the moment, but either way, Reuven, being the firstborn, was always bothered by the fact that his mother, Leah, was kind of secondary. Because who did Yaakov marry first? Or who did he intend to marry first? He intended to marry Rachel. So he intended to marry Rachel, but his father-in-law was a swindler. So he married Rachel's older sister, Leah, first. A week later, he married her younger sister, Rachel. Now he's married to both of them. Leah gives birth, has a number of children. Rachel is barren. She's not having any children. So Rachel and Leah then give their maidservants to be concubines to Yaakov. And Yaakov, through Bilhah and Zilpah, the 2 concubines, has 4 more children. And then Leah gives birth to another 4 children, another 3 children. So by the time we're done, we have Leah has 7 children, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, Zvulun, 6 of the 12 tribes. And she has a daughter, Dinah. And then the 2 concubines, Bilhah and Zilpah, have 4 children, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. You with me? Hope so. And then Rachel gives birth to Binyamin, to Yosef and Binyamin. Now, each one of his wives and concubines had their own tent. And so Yaakov considered his main home, his main tent. They were traveling a lot. His main tent, his home, was Rachel's tent, because that's why he traveled far east to Haran, was initially to marry Rachel, and he wanted to marry Rachel, and he only married Leah because his father-in-law was a swindler. So he saw as his main wife, he saw Rachel. Now Rachel passed away young. She passed away as she gave birth to Binyamin. Now that Rachel passed away, where is Yaakov's bed going to go? Up until this point, it was in Rachel's tent. Rachel was the main wife. So Reuven felt that his father's bed should now be moved into his mother's tent, Leah. She was Rachel's sister. She's the one who gave birth to him, the firstborn, and 50% of the tribes. But Yaakov had other plans. Yaakov moved his bed into Bilhah's tent, one of the concubines, who was the concubine of Rachel. It was Rachel's maidservant. And this Reuven couldn't handle. So what does the verse tell us? And the Talmud expounds upon this verse. It was taught in a brayso that Reb Shimon ben Elazar said, what is the meaning of the verse? And Reuven lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine. It does not mean that he lay with her literally. Rather, it means Reuven protested the affront to his mother. He said, if my mother's sister Rachel was a rival to my mother, will my mother's sister's concubine be a rival to my mother? he immediately stood and rearranged her bed so that Yaakov would enter Leah's tent. This is what Reuven is referring to. This episode is what Yaakov, is referring to in his blessing when he's rebuking Reuven, and he says, you have the restlessness of water. Why? For you ascended upon your father's couch. It doesn't mean literally you ascended upon your father's couch. He mixed up the beds. He decided he's going to mix into his father's marital situation. And that was seen as a sin. We're not going to get into the full details. Why is seen as a sin and what was so terrible? What was he thinking? What was Yaakov's plan? There's a lot behind that, but we're not going to get into it. Whatever the case, the main point is the same. He did something mixing into his father's marital affairs, which he shouldn't have. And his father was upset with him for doing that. And so he rebuked him in this week's Torah portion. As a result of that rebuke, as a result of this action of mixing into his father's business, he lost credibility to a degree, and he lost the gift of being superior over his brothers. He lost the blessing of leadership, of royalty. He will no longer be considered the leader of the Jewish people. Where did it go to? Where did the royalty go to? Which one of the brothers now assumed that leadership position over all the other brothers, over all the Jewish people, till the end of time? Who took Reuven's place? Let's look further on in the blessings, in this week's Torah portion. In the blessing to Yehuda, the tribe of Yehuda, what does Yaakov say? A cub and a grown lion is Yehuda. From the prey, my son, you withdrew. He crouched, rested like a lion, and like a lion, who will rouse him? The scepter shall not depart from Yehuda, nor the student of the law from between his feet, until Shiloh. Shiloh is a euphemism for Mashiach comes, and to him will be a gathering of peoples. So let's look in verse 9. Verse 9 tells us that from the prey, my son, you withdrew. Yehuda withdrew from the prey. And as a result, he moves on to verse 10. He says, the scepter shall not depart from Yehuda. Yehuda shall be royalty amongst the Jewish people. All Jewish kings, King David stemmed from Yehuda, was a descendant of Yehuda. Mashiach will be a descendant of Yehuda. All Jewish kings will be from the tribe of Yehuda going forward, says Yaakov. Yehuda assumed the position of Reuven. Reuven lost the position of being the royalty of the Jewish people because of the story of mixing around into his father's affairs. And Yehuda got that gift. Why? Because he withdrew from the prey. What does it mean he withdrew from the prey? What's it talking about? So Rashi explains, my son, you withdrew yourself and said, what is the gain if we slay our brother and cover up his blood? Once again, it's referencing a story that took place many, many years prior. What happened? Many years prior, Yosef was 17 years old. The brothers did not like him. And the brothers were out in the fields tending to their sheep. And Yosef comes to check on them on behalf of his father. The brothers are sitting together and the brothers see what's going on. He ends up, they decide that they want to kill Yosef. They grab him, they throw him into a pit. And then they're devising a plan on how to kill him. And Yehuda says, hold up, let's not kill him. What do we gain by killing him? Let us sell him as a slave. And that's what they did. They listened to Yehuda. They sold Yosef as a slave. And that's how Yosef ended up in Egypt. So that is the reason why Yehuda earned the royalty, because he figured out a way on how to spare Yosef's life. Then there's another story, also a throwback. What happened after that story? When they saw how terrible their father felt that Yosef disappeared, they demoted Yehuda because they felt that Yehuda said, let's sell him as a slave. Had Yehuda said, let's leave him alone and bring him back to our father, they said, we would have listened to you. So we're demoting you from your position. And he was almost ceremoniously expelled from their brotherhood to a degree, and he left town. He left town, and what happens? The story from a couple of weeks ago. Another story in the Torah. The story was, just to quickly recap, again, lots to discuss about the story, but here's the story. Yehuda goes to a town called Timnah, and in Timnah meets a fellow, goes into business with him. They do great in business. Then he meets a woman, and he marries her, and they have 3 children. First, they have 2 children. 2 children grow older, and then they have a 3rd child who's much younger. It's time for the oldest child to get married. The oldest child's name was Er. Er marries a woman whose name is Tamar. So Tamar is Yehuda's daughter-in-law. Tamar was an exceptional person, was a very special person. She was actually considered a Kohen, a daughter of a priest. Long story of why is that, but we're not going to get into the technical details, just to go over the story quickly. So Yehuda marries this woman, has 3 children. His oldest is Er, and shortly after marrying Tamar, Er dies childless. According to Jewish law, there's a levirate marriage. If a woman's married to a man, the man dies and they have no children, the woman has an option, but until she opts out, she is required to marry the brother, her brother-in-law. And she has the option to opt out, but she's required to marry her brother-in-law first. So she goes ahead, Tamar goes ahead and marries the second, Yehuda's second son, whose name is Onan. And once again, Onan dies, childless. So Tamar says, all right, let me marry your 3rd son. Shelah was his name. Yehuda said, look, Shelah's younger. It'll happen in the near future. You go in the distant future, you go home to your father, and when Shelah is ready to get married, I'll call on you. Years pass, and Tamar sees that Shelah is not being given to her as a husband. But Tamar, being this special woman she was, who had a certain level of prophetic vision, she knew that she is destined to have children through Yehuda. Whether through Yehuda or she thought it was through Yehuda's children. But she sees that it's not happening through Yehuda's children. She's not having any children. So she sees that she has to have children with Yehuda. But how is she going to devise that? She's not married now. Yehuda's not married. His wife had passed. They're both not married. What happens? So she dresses up as a harlot, stands at the corner fork in the road when she hears Yehuda is coming in that direction. Her face was always covered, so Yehuda didn't really know who she was. And Yehuda meets her. And she says, let's go. And he says, let's go. And she says, what are you going to give me for the act? So Yehuda says, look, I'll give you 2 goats, but I don't have them with me. So until I bring the 2 goats, here's my signet ring, my belt, and my walking stick. So he gives her those 3 items, and he has relations with her, and they each go on their way. She disappears. Obviously, she wasn't the harlot. She wasn't a prostitute. She wasn't there. And so when Yehuda comes back and sends his friend back, actually, a short while later to go find her, everyone says there's no such thing. There's no prostitute at this fork in the road. There's no one here that's a harlot. It's non-existent because she wasn't. She just did it because she knew that she has to have descendants through Yehuda. 3 months later, it's noticeable that she is expecting. So they tell Yehuda, your daughter-in-law is expecting, and according to Jewish law, at that point, and once again, there's lots of details. We're not going to get into all the details. This is just for the story. According to Jewish law, she deserved capital punishment. So Yehuda says, look, if she's expecting, and it means it's because she had an illicit relationship, capital punishment. So what happens? She very easily could say, I don't deserve capital punishment because it's from Yehuda. Yehuda is the father of the baby. But she doesn't do that because she doesn't want to embarrass Yehuda. That's how far she went. Now, Yehuda had no idea that it was from him because, again, he had no idea that it was Tamar that he had relations with 3 months earlier. What does the verse tell us? What happens? Text form. She was taken out and she sent to her father-in-law saying, from the man to whom these belonged, I am pregnant. And she said, please recognize whose signet ring, cloak, and staff are these. So she says, these belong to the father. And what was her idea? Yehuda, come forward. Now, Yehuda could have easily disappeared. He doesn't want to endure the embarrassment, the humiliation. It's a public spectacle. And he could have just said, all right, let her be killed and move on. He'd feel pained. Yehuda doesn't do that. Then Yehuda recognized them, and he said, she is right. It is from me because I did not give her to my son Shelah, but he no longer continued to be intimate with her. And the verse continues that she actually gave birth to two children, and one of them became the ancestor of King David. And that's how the Davidic line came to be, which is a topic that we discussed many, many times in the past. But what's the point of the story? Why are we bringing this story? The Talmud tells us that this story is also hinted at in the blessings from Yaakov to his son Yehuda for the reason why he deserved to receive the royalty. Why? Because Yehuda's courage to publicly admit his sin, to publicly admit what had occurred, that he was the father, which technically wasn't a sin. For him, he perceived it as a sin, but it wasn't a sin. And to bear the humiliation rather than send someone to death, that earned him and his descendants the privilege to be the Jewish monarchy for eternity. So what do we have here? It seems to paint a picture of quite a courageous individual. Yehuda is this courageous individual who's willing to go against the grain, whether it was the story of his brothers when they wanted to kill him, when they wanted to kill Yosef, he stood up and said, no, we're not going to kill him. We don't gain anything. And then the story of Tamar, where he stood up and he could have avoided humiliation and embarrassment, and instead he stood up and publicly endured the embarrassment as not to have Tamar go to her death. And so as a result, he deserves royalty. Reuven, on the other hand, who was he? He was someone who caused such stress to his father, such pain to his father. He got involved in his father's dealings. He deserved to lose the privilege of the Jewish monarch. There's just one problem. Granted that each one of these concepts probably bear within them certain character traits and that we're not highlighting them. So these stories in and of themselves don't necessarily show a privilege these stories don't necessarily show the right to earn the privilege of Jewish monarchy. It's probably a character trait that these stories express, but be it as it may, in these two instances where Yehuda seemingly excelled, Reuven excels equally. Not just equally, seemingly Reuven excels even more than Yehuda. Let's take the first story. Why did we say Yehuda was great? Because Yehuda saved his brother Yosef from being killed. Right? He was in the pit. Yosef was in the pit. The brothers said, let's kill him. Yehuda said, let's not kill him. Let's sell him as a slave. And as a result, Yosef was saved. But hold on. How did he get into the pit? Let's take a few steps back. Let's look at the verse. How did he get into the pit? Yosef was coming from the town where they lived out into the field on behalf of his father to see how his brothers were doing. And what happens? The brothers said one to another, behold, the dreamer is coming. And what do the brothers say? So now let us kill him and we will cast him into one of the pits and we will say, a wild beast devoured him and we will see what will become of his dreams. So before he even ended up in the pit, the brothers wanted to kill him. And why didn't they kill him? But Reuven heard and he said, but Reuven heard and he saved him from their hands and he said, let us not deal with him a deadly blow. And Reuven said to them, do not shed blood, cast him into this pit, which is in the desert, but do not lay a hand upon him in order to save him from their hands, to return him to his father. So Yaakov was impressed with Yehuda, how Yehuda saved Yosef, but Yehuda didn't really save Yosef. He said, well, we don't gain any money by killing him. Let's sell him as a slave. In other words, then we'll make some money off of him. He didn't take him out of his misery. He saved him from being killed. Reuven, on the other hand, Reuven was the one who put him in the pit in the first place in order to save him entirely. So you tell me, matching them up to each other, Reuven to Yehuda, who did a better job when it came to saving Yosef? Was it Reuven or was it Yehuda? Seems to be Reuven aced this one. Yehuda, instead of killing him, said, let's make some money off of him. Reuven said, I'm going to save him. Let's put him in the pit. And then I'll take him out of the pit where my brothers are not looking. I'll bring him back to our father. And even when it comes to the second story, right, what was so great about Yehuda? His courage to publicly admit his sin and bear the humiliation rather than send someone to death. Reuven, on the other hand, he mixed into his father's affairs. He also did a sin. That was a terrible sin. But hold on. What did Yehuda do? He announced publicly. He bore the humiliation for those few minutes, and then life moved on. You know what Reuven did as a result? Reuven sat for years on end, crying, praying to God, begging for forgiveness from God for the fact that he got involved with his father's affairs. For years. As a matter of fact, the Talmud says, who is the first one to properly repent? That is Reuven, who repented properly for the sin he did to his father by mixing into his father's affairs. And as a matter of fact, that's where Reuven was. Right? What was the story with Yosef and the brothers? So Yosef comes from the city to the field to find out where his brothers are, to find out how they're doing. And they say, let's kill Yosef. And Reuven says, no, let's not kill him. Let's throw him into the pit. What was Reuven's plan? We'll put him in the pit. Brothers won't be looking. I'll take him out of the pit and bring him back home. Why didn't he do that? Why was Yehuda able to convince the brothers to sell him later? Because shortly after they put him in the pit, Reuven disappeared. Where did he go? Says the Midrash. Where was Reuven when Joseph was sold? Rabbi Eliezer said he was occupied with his sackcloth and ashes. Traditionally in Judaism, part of the repentance process is to sit with sackcloth and ashes and pray and be introspective about one's life. And what happens after he concluded sitting in sackcloth and ashes, begging God to forgive him for what he had done years before to his father? He comes back. And Reuben returned to the pit, says the verse. And behold, Yosef was not in the pit. So he rent his garments and he returned to his brothers and he said, the boy is gone and where will I go? So now let's line up Yehuda and Reuben. Tell us who repented for their sin, who regretted their sin more. It seems to be that Reuven aced this one as well and was superior to Yehuda in this as well. So why does Yaakov choose Yehuda over Reuven to be the leadership tribe? And as a result of these two stories. This is where it's going to get a little Kabbalistic. In order to understand why Yehuda was chosen for leadership over Reuven, we have to try to understand what royal leadership is really all about. See, a king's role is to lead his nation, set up judiciary system, a police force, and enforcement system, a taxation system, social justice and social reform, etc., all different programs for his population. And he has to be aloof. He has to remain separate from the people. He has to maintain a certain unique, feeling of distance. And the people have to recognize as such that he's not one of them in order for that system to work, to understand that he's their leader, and they need to have this respect and awe of him as the king. And only in such a way can he properly fulfill his duties. In the language of Kabbalah, this concept is called hisnasus. Hisnasus is the character trait of preeminence. where one feels preeminent over another, superior over another. For a king to properly fulfill his duties, he needs to have this character trait of hisnasus, preeminence. But there's a unique difference between this character trait and other character traits. You see, when it comes to other character traits that are within people, the character traits are inherent, regardless of others outside of the individual. What do I mean by that? Take, for example, the character trait of kindness. If someone is inherently kind, they don't need a second person for them to be kind. They're a kind person. If a second person comes into the room, they show their kindness. Their kindness now has a way of expressing itself. But they're a kind person whether there's another person in the room or there's no other person around. They're still a kind person. When it comes to preeminence, it's impossible to be preeminent if there's no other in existence. By definition, preeminence means I am preeminent over another individual. So in other words, in order for a king to be a king, there needs to be a nation. A king cannot be a king without a nation, by definition. Let's have a look in Hasidic excerpt from the 6th Rebbe of Chabad, text 6, who explains this idea. Slightly Kabbalistic, but it's a powerful explanation. The sephira of royalty, the character trait of royalty, is different from the other sephirot. This can be explained in terms of the qualities of the human soul. In the case of the attribute of kindness, it can exist even if there is no beneficiary of that generosity. One who is inherently a good person has goodness and kindness in their hearts. And if they happen to encounter someone who needs it, they will extend that kindness and goodness. Moreover, this internal quality of kindness can manifest as a feeling even if it isn't directed at anyone per se, as seen in the case of the patriarch Avraham, who always experienced a feeling of kindness. Therefore, after Avraham's circumcision, when Hashem made it exceptionally hot outside to dissuade passerby from burdening Avram, it bothered him because the kindness was manifest within. However, and here's the key point, the attribute of royalty, which is the sole quality of preeminence, cannot exist without another person. As we see empirically, someone lost in a barren desert devoid of other people does not experience the attribute of preeminence. And therefore, it's impossible to be a king without a nation. In the words of the Medrash, the nation appoints the king, and the king cannot appoint himself if they do not appoint him. So in a way, this shifts the whole balance of power of the monarch, of the king, if you think about it. Because on the one hand, yes, it's true that the people are commoners, the people are regular, simple people compared to the king. And the king is this great individual who's head and shoulders, to borrow a term from the verse in the prophets, he's head and shoulders above the rest of the nation. And he ought to be that way. There ought to be this fear, this respect, this distance between the king and the nation. But on the other hand, the king is entirely dependent on the nation for his very existence. He's no longer a king if he doesn't have a nation. And as a result, according to Judaism, and really inherently, that is the definition of a king has to be, to a degree, subservient to the needs of the nation. His entire being, his entire existence ought to be one not of himself, but of the nation. What does the nation need? It's not about me, the king. It's not about him. It's not about the monarch. It's about the people. What do the people need? What can I do for the people? It's not about what I need. It's not about how great I am. It's about how great my nation is. It's not about what I need. It's about what my nation needs. It's not about me. It's about them. And Maimonides puts it beautifully in the laws of a Jewish king. Maimonides explains exactly what a king is according to Jewish law. Just as the Torah, says Maimonides, has granted the king great honor and obligated everyone to revere him, so too has it commanded him to be lowly and empty at heart. It's not about him. As it is written regarding King David, my heart is a void within me. Nor should he treat Israel with overbearing haughtiness. As it is written, he should not lift up his heart above his brothers. What should a king do? How should a king behave? He should be gracious and merciful to the small and the great, involving himself in their good and welfare. He should protect the honor of even the humblest of men. When he speaks to the people as a community, he should speak gently. As it is written in Chronicles, listen, my brothers and my people. And in Hebrew, the Hebrew word for listen means calmly and gently. Similarly, it is written in the book of Kings, if today you will be a servant to these people, he should always conduct himself with great humility. But what do you mean he's the king? Yes, he's the king, and the people need to respect him and revere him. But he himself has to conduct himself with great humility because it's not about him. He's a nobody. The king is a nobody. He's only a somebody because of the people, and so he ought to treat them as such, that they are the entire reason of his existence. He needs to treat them without arrogance. He needs to treat them with mercy, with grace. He needs to treat them with great humility. That is what a king is all about. That's what a true leader is all about. A true leader is one who realizes the importance of the others, not about himself. True leaders are extremely focused on others because they realize that the entire concept of leadership depends on others. And that's what separates a leader from a regular person. Someone who gives up their entire being for another. Now that we understand the concept of a leader, a king in Judaism, now we can get back to the story of Yehuda and Reuven. See, when Reuven mixed into his father's affairs, his father's business, Yaakov told Reuven that that's what cost him the monarchy. Why? Because he hastened to display his anger. Yes, he felt he was doing it for the honor of his mother, and it bothered him so much, but he did it fast. He did it out of anger, and he didn't think about the other person. He didn't think what it's going to do to his father. He didn't think how it's going to affect Bilhah. He didn't think how it's going to affect his brothers. He didn't care how it's going to affect others. He cared about the here and now, the way I feel. And the way I feel is to honor my mother. It's going to affect others detrimentally. It's going to hurt others. Give them a look at that. That's not behavior of a leader. A leader looks at others. How is it going to affect others? He cares primarily about others. This behavior, look in the last line of this text, this behavior is the opposite of helping others. And the same thing when it came to the story of saving Joseph. What did Reuven say? Reuven said, I'm going to save him by putting him in the pit, and therefore, later on, I'm going to take him out of the pit. That's what he had in mind, right? The verse says that he put him in the pit because he said to himself, I'm going to save him later. What did Reuven tell himself? The divine spirit testifies, the verse testifies for Reuven that he said this only to save him so that he would be able to come and take him out of there. He said, what did Reuven say to himself? I am the firstborn and the eldest of them all. The sin will be attributed only to me. That's what Reuven was worried about. Why is he trying to save Yosef? Not because Yosef needs to be saved. Not because his brothers are about to do the unthinkable by killing their brother. No, he's worried about one thing. He's worried about himself. I'm the oldest. The sin's going to be attributed to me, and so I better stop it. Again, he's not thinking about others. He's thinking about himself. It's right there in the verse. What does the verse say? What was the first thing that happens when Reuben comes back and he sees Yosef's not in the pit? Right? What did these verses we read before? Verse 29. And Reuben returned to the pit, and behold, Yosef was not in the pit. So he's rent his garments. And he returned to his brothers and he said, the boy is gone. And where will I go? Again, about himself. What does Rashi say? Where will I go? Where will I flee from my father's pain? Again, about him. We're not worried about you, Reuven, right now. You should be worried about your brother Yosef. You should be worried about your other brothers who may have committed the unthinkable. You should be worried about your father. Don't be worried about yourself. And I, where will I go? What's it about you? It's not about you, Reuven. You're not leadership quality, says Yaakov. Because what was he worried about? He's worried if anything's going to happen to Yosef, the sin's going to be attributed to me. Where am I going to go in the face of my father's pain? It's not about you, Reuven. That is the problem. He's thinking about himself. He's not thinking about others. You lose the privilege of royalty because that is not how a leader behaves. A leader is not for themselves. A leader is for the people, for others. And that's how Yehuda behaves. How does Yehuda behave? Yehuda behaves differently. What's Yehuda worried about? Yehuda's worried about Yosef. Yehuda's worried, right? What does he do? Yehuda takes Yosef out of the pit, and he has an issue. His issue is his brothers want to kill Yosef. He's got to get Yosef out of the picture. He's got to make Yosef disappear. And he comes up with a great idea. He tells the brothers, let's sell him. What is Yehuda's plan? Yehuda's plan is let's get Yosef out of the picture. It's all about Yosef. About me, that they're going to look at me, that I should have come up with a better plan, and therefore I got demoted, which was what actually happened. He got demoted. He didn't care about that. It's not about me. I got demoted. My brothers look down on me. They blame me. No problem. Let them blame me. Let them look down at me. As long as I saved Yosef's life, which ultimately is what he did. He saved Yosef's life. By Reuven putting Yosef in the pit and then disappearing again for his own needs, of crying about a sin that he did many years ago. Granted, fine, you have to ask for forgiveness, you have to regret it, but now's not the time. Now's the time to save Yosef. By the fact that he disappeared when Yosef was in the pit, his brothers could have killed him at that point. He wasn't worried about it. He was worried about saving his own soul. What was Yehuda worried about? Not about himself. Yehuda was worried about the other. That's all that mattered to him. And that's why Yehuda got the privilege of being royalty. And the same thing when it comes to the other story. When it comes to Yehuda announcing. Yehuda's story, the story of Yehuda and Tamar, when Yehuda announced publicly that I am the father of the child. And he took upon himself humiliation. That sparked Reuven to do the same. What does that mean? See, from when Reuven mixed into his father's business, moved his father's bed, he saw that his father got really upset. But guess what? He didn't tell his father it was me who did it. He just went ahead and repented before God. He cried, he asked forgiveness from God. He didn't tell his father it was me who did it. Please forgive me. So for years, if I'm not mistaken, it says it was for 9 years. For years, Yaakov suspected his brothers as well. It could have been any one of the brothers who mixed the bed around. But again, Reuven wasn't about the others. It was about himself. He was repenting. He was asking God for forgiveness for his sin. That others were also being accused and questioned by their father that perhaps they did it, that didn't matter to him. When did he change? When did he come clean to his father and say, it was me who moved the bed? Only after Yehuda announced publicly, I am the father of that child. Don't kill her. Once Yehuda did it, that's when Reuven suddenly found the courage to do it as well. So even in this case where seemingly Reuven comes out on top, even in this case, Reuven only confessed to his father because of Yehuda confessing public. Once again, we see this idea that Yehuda was always there caring about others. Reuven was caring about himself. And as a result, Yaakov says, I am taking the leadership, the royalty from you, Reuven, and giving it over to Yehuda, because Yehuda showed leadership quality by being humble about himself, being willing to put himself on the line just to be there for the others, to make sure that the others get what they need. That is true leadership. Now, each one of us, we may not be kings, we may not be leaders in the literal sense, but we are leaders to a degree. Where are we leaders? We're leaders in our own surroundings. We're leaders at every moment of our day, whether it's with our family, whether it's with our friends, whether it's with... What is the idea of a leader? Being there for others. Recognizing that it's not so much about myself, it's about other people. And recognizing, perhaps to a greater degree, that we are all called on the name of Yehuda. What's the name of the Jewish people in Hebrew? Yehudim, Jews. The word Jews, what does it come from? It comes from the Hebrew Yehudi. It's the English translation of the Hebrew word Yehudi. Where does Yehudi come from? Yehuda. All the Jewish people are called on the name of Yehuda. Why? Because we all are leaders in some way. And true leadership means prioritizing others' needs above our own, prioritizing results above intentions. Not like Reuven, but in this sense, to be like Yehuda, to be there for others, to express and flex our true leadership skills.